This is what, my fifth video about Megatron and his stupid cannon? Whatever, the people voted for it. Megatron has been one of the most iconic Decepticons of all time, appearing in almost every piece of Transformers media to date, across live action or cartoons, comics, and video games. Megatron's design has been quite fluid. However, the one part of him that has stayed mostly the same over the years has been his iconic weapon, the fusion cannon. A mighty weapon for the most imposing of tyrants. So, when High Moon Studios went about making a playable Megatron for their Transformers third-person shooter video games, the opportunity to let players in on the raw destructive power of the iconic weapon became ever prevalent to them. In today's video, I will be going over the evolution of Megatron's fusion cannon throughout the Cybertron games. The fusion cannon was shown off as one of the very first weapons ever revealed in the War for Cybertron trailer and marketing material, along with Megatron's design himself. The weapon didn't change whatsoever throughout the marketing material, and once the game launched, players would be met with the destructive power of the weapon within the first level of the campaign. Megatron spawns with the weapon equipped on every playthrough, on every level, and the weapon perfectly elevates Megatron's new Cybertronian design. Right off the bat, we can see that the fusion cannon is actually the most unique weapon design in the Cybertron games, as it is actually the only weapon to not feature the character transforming their arm into the weapon. Instead, the fusion cannon simply attaches to the side of Megatron's arm, just like in G1. Unlike in G1, however, the cannon looks very sharp and very large, almost being larger than his actual arm. The weapon also features a very scrappy look to it, almost being rusted, and a popular theory that actually originated from yours truly is that Megatron built his iconic cannon himself. The weapon's reload animation actually shows Megatron loading the weapon with some particularly small rounds. Like, these things look like what a modern-day punt gun would shoot. Maybe even the rounds for an A-10 Warthog. Not the massive firepower that something like the Path Blaster would later fire. Like Optimus and his Ion Blaster, Megatron can never detach himself from his personal weapon, and no other character is able to wield the weapon in campaign. Unlike Optimus and his Ion Blaster, the weapon does frequently suffer from a lack of ammo. The weapon uses 5 rounds in the magazine, with an extra 20 being able to be held in reserves. However, due to the amount of enemies that the player is usually facing, it's either constantly on the verge of running out of ammo on easier difficulties, or the weapon is completely empty half of the playthrough on hard mode. However, the weapon does make up for this lack of ammo with its devastating damage, proving to be one of the most damaging weapons in all of the campaign. High Moon decided to make the fusion cannon function almost like a rocket launcher, with the weapon firing slow-moving projectiles which explode on impact, with a devastating area of effect, which will absolutely eliminate a generic foot soldier, along with severely damaging any Autobots nearby. The weapon is able to differentiate itself from the actual Thermo rocket launcher by possessing one extra round, along with lacking the lock-on ability that the Thermo rocket launcher has, though making up for it with a faster projectile speed. Overall, the fusion cannon in campaign is a really solid weapon. However, its ammo economy does tend to lead players relying heavily on a more reliable secondary. However, the weapon would be able to shine a lot more outside of the story. The fusion cannon in multiplayer is available for the leader class, and actually behaves slightly differently than its campaign counterpart. The weapon actually suffers from having a wider spread, leading to less accurate shots being taken. However, this slight nerf doesn't necessarily lead to a decrease in the use of the weapon. Many players would just end up using the fusion cannon at short to medium ranges, and seeing how it's an explosive weapon, the nerf to its accuracy didn't exactly lead to less people using the weapon. Its place in the multiplayer sandbox also eliminated one of the issues with its campaign variant, that being its lack of ammo. In multiplayer, the weapon doesn't gain any more reserve ammo. However, because the player is dying and respawning, most players don't actually end up running out of ammo before they die, and as such, they simply respawn with a fully loaded fusion cannon. As such, many players would end up using the weapon in multiplayer, and its devastating explosive damage was sure to carry most leader mains through a match. The only reason why some leaders wouldn't choose to use the fusion cannon is because they also had access to Optimus Prime's iconic Ion Blaster on the same class. So it really became a question of personal preference between the two primary weapons, as most players would leave their secondary slot open for a more specialized weapon. Overall, the weapon is favored quite well by most leader class players, and the issues with the weapon are less prevalent in the faster paced multiplayer. But what about when it came to mowing down hordes of Autobots? Well, that question would not be answered in War for Cybertron, as like Optimus's iconic Ion Blaster, the fusion cannon would not appear in Escalation at all. Some people think that's a shame, but I can just see the hordes of enemies accentuating the weapon's already pitiful ammo economy. Although later on we'd find out that the weapon can actually perform rather well in Escalation, but we'll get to that eventually. Right now, we've got to check out how the weapon would change for the Fall of Cybertron campaign. Right off the bat, the fusion cannon was shown off in Fall of Cybertron's marketing as being nearly unchanged from its War for Cybertron counterpart, with Megatron's new design still bearing the same fusion cannon attached to his arm. And indeed, when the game eventually launched, the fusion cannon was actually still in the game, just not as a weapon available for players to use. The weapon is seen on a single hologram of Megatron in campaign, along with an in-game cutscene, which it is shown off alongside Megatron's War for Cybertron design. However, the players aren't able to look at the old weapon for very long, as it's destroyed alongside Megatron in the third level of the campaign, and never makes a return again. The weapon isn't seen again until Megatron returns later on in the campaign, in which players are immediately introduced to the new fusion cannon, or rather, the old fusion cannon, the Riot Cannon. The Riot Cannon performs quite similarly to the fusion cannon of old. However, its magazine has been reduced from holding 5 shots to just 4. However, to compensate for the lower magazine capacity, the reserve was increased from 20 shots to 25 shots. These extra 5 rounds provide so much more to the weapon than you might think. Just having 1 extra magazine from the old War for Cybertron fusion cannon almost completely eliminates its ammo shortage problem on the lower difficulties, with it only really being an issue that rears its ugly head again on hard mode. The weapon is still just as destructive and devastating in campaign, and fortunately, it only benefits even further from Fall of Cybertron's weapon upgrade system. The Hyper Interlink speeds up reload time by 50%, and costs 2,400 Energon shards. As usual, this is an excellent and must-have attachment. The Sonic Blast increases the weapon's fire rate substantially, and costs 1,800 Energon shards, effectively allowing the weapon to fire fully automatically. No idea why anyone would want this, as the weapon is going to run out of ammo much faster, alongside with its explosive damage not really needing more than 1 to 2 shots per enemy. The Ion cartridge increases the weapon's capacity back to the War for Cybertron fusion cannons, now placing 5 shots in the magazine for the cost of 1,350 Energon shards. Quite useful and nostalgic for any veteran of the War for Cybertron. The ever-devastating Planet Buster upgrade is available after purchasing all other weapon upgrades, and it loads the final round of the magazine with a super powerful explosive round. This upgrade is easily the most recognizable upgrade for the weapon, and it is a must-have upgrade for the weapon on any playthrough. Overall, the Riot Cannon is a fantastic replacement for the Fusion Cannon, and actually has quite a lot of interesting lore attached to it. If you want to learn more about the history of the Riot Cannon and what its significance is to the Decepticon history, I actually made a lore video all about it almost over a year ago. But overall, the weapon is pretty great in campaign. But what about when being used against other players? The Riot Cannon is yet again available for the Destroyer class in Fall of Cybertron, and is able to stand much more on its own 2 feet, with the lack of the Ion Blaster available for the class. You see, the Destroyer no longer has access to such a reliable primary weapon, instead having the A4 Pulsar Cannon, the Thermo Rocket Launcher, and the Chaos Rift Combustor alongside the Riot Cannon. Now you're probably noticing a pattern here. Notably, each of these weapons are effectively a rocket launcher or grenade launcher. As such, almost all choices of weaponry are specialized weapons. The Riot Cannon is used by almost every Destroyer main in Fall of Cybertron's multiplayer, as it's really the only viable primary weapon, with everything else being either a single-shot situational weapon or a 3-shot remote detonation rocket launcher. However, the riot cannon is an excellent primary weapon, as its high explosive damage leads to plenty of easy kills for destroyers. The weapon would also be supported greatly by Fall of Cybertron's attachment system, which we'll now go into. The Sonic Blast attachment increases the weapon's rate of fire. Unlike in campaign, this upgrade is actually rather useful, as typically most players will take more than just 1 or 2 shots to take down. Personally, I run this attachment quite a lot. It really helps me when I freak out and need to fire a bunch of shots as I scream and pray not to die. The Ion cartridge increases the amount of ammo within the magazine, a useful upgrade which unfortunately falls short of the other 2 attachments. The Planet Buster does the exact same thing that it does in campaign. The last shot in the magazine is twice as explosive and damaging. And most players who use the riot cannon use this iconic attachment in multiplayer. It simply fits the weapon so well. The incredibly destructive power shot upgrade works so well with Megatron's iconic weapon. And it's also quite funny, as in the lore, the attachment is an illegal black market weapon mod that Swindle used to sell to elite guardsmen, so they could turn their riot cannons from anti-riot dispersal weapons into lethal police brutality cannons. Overall, the riot cannon would be beloved by all destroyers in Fall of Cybertron, not only because it was really the only viable primary weapon that they had access to, but also because it performed quite admirably on its own. However, almost everyone who's played Fall of Cybertron and loves the riot cannon does not do so because of the way it plays in campaign or in multiplayer. The riot cannon is, after all, most synonymous with the 3rd game mode in Fall of Cybertron. The riot cannon is available on almost every single Escalation map, only being absent from the map Ancients, and it is available for 600 Energon shards. Odds are, if you love the riot cannon, you love it because of Escalation. While the fusion cannon was absent from War for Cybertron's Escalation, and I believed it to be because of its lack of ammo, the riot cannon not only appears within Fall of Cybertron's Escalation, but also does suffer from its ammo economy. And yet, the riot cannon is inarguably the best weapon to choose for the waves of enemies in Escalation. The weapon's explosive AoE damage combined with its high damage and the fact that it's a primary weapon that uses primary ammo makes it a perfect weapon for taking out clusters of enemies. Even with its low ammo reserve, players often just make use of the ammo resupply ability that some characters possess, or just by killing enough enemies and purchasing ammo. As such, many players who play Escalation favor the riot cannon as the primary weapon to use in Escalation. It's so odd. The weapon, which theoretically should be the least effective in a horde mode, actually finds itself being the most used weapon among players. I doubted the riot cannon so much, and yet it proved me completely wrong in Escalation. So, that's been the evolution of Megatron's fusion cannon, and later, as its generic supplicant, would be called the riot cannon. I've already made a whole lore video on this weapon in the past, but since you all voted for it, I was bound to you all to make another video. Let me know which weapons you want to see me make a video on next in the comments below, and make sure you vote in the poll tomorrow. Thank you for watching, Tell All are one.